Hello, everybody, and welcome to this morning's Women's Mental Health Network event on mental health in midlife. My name is Louise O'Leary. I'm Advocacy Manager in St. Patrick's Mental Health Services, and I coordinate the Women's Mental Health Network along with my colleague here in St. Patrick's, Elaine Donnelly, and Alana Ryan and Faye White, who are Women's Health Coordinator and Women's Health Officer respectively in the National Women's Council of Ireland. For anyone unfamiliar with the network, it has two aims: one, to serve as an information sharing and networking platform for anyone with a committed interest in women's mental health, and two, to advance interdisciplinary and multi-agency collaboration on women's mental health issues. You can find more information on the network and about how to join via stpatricks.ie and nwci.ie websites. I'd like to take a moment to give a very warm welcome to Alana and Faye, who have both recently joined the National Women's Council team and who are experiencing their very first Women's Mental Health Network event today. So you can give a wave there and say hello. So hi, Alana.
Hiya, thanks so much, Louise, and great to be here and looking forward to continuing the work over the next few years. It's great to be involved in the network.
Thanks, Alana. And Faye is there as well.
Thanks a million, Louise. Yeah, I'm really excited to be involved and I'm really looking forward to hearing from our speakers today. So thanks a million.
Brilliant, you're very welcome. I think it's important everyone see faces and know names. So if you've any queries, from anybody about the network members or otherwise, who you're contacting, who's at the end of the email. So this is our second event of 2021, and we're delighted to have so many of you tuning in this morning. We were just discussing there in our preparation chat how much interest there has been. We've had over 400 people register, which I think speaks to the level of interest in this topic and also the need for greater attention to this area. While we've seen some very welcome recent media attention over the year to menopause in particular and related topics, midlife and menopause especially hasn't been an area that has garnered sufficient interest in terms of open conversation, supports, and understanding and awareness at a broad level. Our speakers today, in different ways through their work, are hoping to change that. And we're keen to explore with them specifically menopause and how it can impact mental health, different approaches and supports available, but also broader socioeconomic contexts relevant to mental health and midlife, including the significance of work life and the workplace and gender roles and caring roles during this time of life. It's important we acknowledge at the outset the diversity of experiences when it comes to both menopause and midlife experiences more generally. For example, we know that younger women can experience premature menopause and that there can be additional complexities for women with particular health conditions or disabilities, for women with learning disabilities, for example. And as with other aspects of health, issues of equality or inequality can intersect to compound a person's health experiences and ability to access supports where they might be needed. For example, for people with different gender identities or women from marginalized communities. I'm very conscious, while we may not have the scope to delve sufficiently into all of these areas today, we do hope we can share a strong level of information and get a good conversation going nonetheless. A couple of things before we get going. This event is being recorded and will be shared afterwards if you want to watch back. The Q&A function is active on the chat function, so please type in any comments or questions for our panel there, and we'll do our best to get back directly, and we'll have time to get through some of these before we finish also. Also, we're conscious with conversations on mental health topics, these can be difficult sometimes, so we'd encourage you to please take a break if you need it, and we'll also share links to different support information during the course of the event. We'll move on to our panel now, and we're delighted and grateful to have with us Dr. Cueva Hartley, Breeda Bermingham, Dr. Cliona Loughnane and Catherine O'Keefe, who are all very kindly giving their time today. We're going to hear from each of them individually, and then we'll regroup at the end for a panel discussion. So to get things started, I'd like to welcome Dr. Cueva Hartley, founder of Menopause Health, a new clinic based in Dublin, bringing Irish women access to the best advice and individualised care from the time of perimenopause. Since qualifying in medicine from UCD in 2007, Dr. Hartley has developed her skills and expertise in the area of women's health and menopause care. She became accredited by both the North American Menopause Society and the British Menopause Society, and was recently honoured to become a British Menopause Society trainer. She was awarded membership of the Irish College of General Practice in 2013, obtaining diplomate status with the Royal College of Obstetrics and Gynecologists in 2012, and achieving a certificate in women's health from the Irish College of General Practice. So we're very conscious of a very busy workday, Dr. Hartley, so we're very grateful for you being here. I'll invite you to unmute yourself and turn on your camera.
Now, hi, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes, I think so.
Great.
Thanks so much for being here.
No, it's a pleasure. Delighted to be here.
That's great. Thank you. So first of all, to get us started, can you tell us a bit about the work you do through menopause health?
Yeah, so we set up about 5 months ago, and the aim was really to, I suppose, provide a dedicated space for women's health, but particularly for women going through perimenopause and menopause. And we do a bit of general women's health, but the focus is really on the menopausal transition. So it's been really busy, which probably won't come as much of a surprise to anyone given the kind of recent attention that's been paid to the area, which is great. And yeah, it's great. We've 3 doctors now, and I hope we provide this kind of nice space for women to come in and chat. So I think one of the main issues and one of the challenges in general practice for me was to try and talk about something like menopause or hormone therapy or whatever it might be in a short space of time, like in the kind of limitations of or the confines of a kind of general practice setting where you're often under time pressure, obviously, because you have to see, you're trying to get through your list of patients for that day. It's nice to have that bit of time to kind of actually go through a history, examine someone if they need to be examined, work through the symptoms that are, affecting them most, or what questions they might have, and hopefully answer all of their concerns before they leave. And usually we'll talk about treatment options, whether that's hormone therapy or non-hormonal therapy or lifestyle. And then usually we do a sort of long-term health overview. So we look at bone health and cardiovascular health and other things that are important too.
Okay. So very broad range in a very short time addressed. And I imagine mental health concerns are explored within that as well.
I mean, it's so common. So yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. And part of our aim with this webinar is to unpack some of, I guess, the issues around during midlife, and especially related to menopause that may have implications for women's mental health. I am conscious of there'll be different levels of familiarity and awareness out there this morning. So could we start with what menopause actually means? And then perhaps if you could share some of what's known about impacts on mental health.
Okay, so menopause itself is just the final menstrual period. It's when your periods stop, your reproductive life stops, and you're not producing you're not ovulating anymore. So, and you're not producing estrogen or progesterone or other slightly more important hormones from your ovaries anymore. So that's what it reflects. It reflects your ovarian function sort of coming to its end. The problem is that there is a knock-on effect of that. There's an effect on our long-term health, and there can be effect in a symptomatic way as well. So our body basically has to adjust to this new environment of not having, in particular, estrogens, a hormone it has had in a kind of significant amount, waxing and waning for years. And then all of a sudden that hormone is gone over the course of a few short years, and it has to adjust to that. But our brain has to adjust. And estrogen is one of those really interesting kind of hormones. It has an effect in a different way on lots of different functions, really from, top of your head to the bottom of your toes type thing. Specifically for mood, we know that mood is a really important issue at menopause, and women are approximately 3 times more likely to have an issue with depression or anxiety as they go through the menopausal transition. So, I mean, putting a time frame on that can be difficult, because perimenopause, which is when your periods may become irregular, or more specifically, I suppose, when your ovaries start producing a fluctuating amount of these hormones, that can start often in your mid-40s, but there's huge variability from person to person. So it can be really common to have mood symptoms creep up anytime from then. And you can kind of wade into the science of, well, you lose progesterone, which is the hormone you produce when you ovulate. And we know progesterone has a really important impact on our mood, anxiety, our ability to sleep and get good quality sleep. That's often the hormone that actually starts to disappear a bit earlier in this whole process. And so it's quite common even early on, even when someone is still having periods, for them to report that their PMS type symptoms are getting worse. I'm more irritable, I feel a bit tearful, their mood becomes a bit more labile and volatile. And there's a spectrum. So for some women, it's not going to have a big impact on their quality of life, but for other women, it has a hugely detrimental impact. And I suppose depression and anxiety are separate to that then. And they're, like I said, you're 3 times more likely to have those diagnosed as you go through perimenopause or menopause. Why that is, there's loads of different theories about estrogen's effect in our brain, about its effect on what are called neuromodulators, so things like serotonin and noradrenaline and other things in our brain that have an important function in how our brain works and our mood. And we actually need estrogen to help properly synthesize those hormones, to break them down properly, etc. So we know estrogen has this big important impact on our brain. Even vascular flow, like blood flow in your brain, can be related to your estrogen levels. So, which has been demonstrated on brain scans in the States. So like, it's really interesting. Yeah. So it's a far reaching thing. It's a spectrum. I think it's really important to sit down and open that conversation with someone and see where they are on that spectrum.
Okay. That's a really helpful setting the scene for us. So I think that's a really important message of that there's a spectrum. So it's not predetermined that you'll necessarily have mental health impacts, but there is also that, for example, the 3 times more likely to experience depression is quite a significant statistic. So for women who maybe perhaps are noticing changes in mood or anxiety, or I know you meant insomnia or sleep difficulties, or have other concerns about their mental health, what would you recommend women who have these concerns during menopause or perimenopause? What would you recommend?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to talk to your support. So if you have a partner or family member or friend or someone close to you, and if you feel comfortable doing it, to talk to someone near you and open up that conversation. And if you feel that you need added support to that, or or you're concerned, or it's impacting your quality of life, the next step would be your GP usually. And hopefully if you have a good relationship with your GP, they can guide you in terms of, what your options are. And so I think a call to the GP is probably the first place I would go. Look at lifestyle and be conscious that other things contribute to mood. So, how much you're exercising, your sleep, your diet, and other things obviously have an important role to play. In saying that, I think it's really frustrating to say to someone, look, you need to exercise more and sleep better, as if it's that easy, and it's not that easy. And especially actually if you have low mood, if you're depressed, if you have very, very bad anxiety, it's often that's a barrier to then getting out and doing exercise in itself. So there's a lot of teasing out with the individual sitting in front of you, what you can do to help them.
Thank you. There's some really good tips, and that's a very insightful point about the kind of ease with which lifestyle recommendations are made. And when we think of the kind of motivational challenges people have with low mood, but also, the most common time of life that menopause strikes at is often one of the busiest times of life, in terms of caring responsibilities and work demands and things like that. So that's a very thoughtful way of framing it. Thank you so much for getting us started. We're going to come back to you in the panel. I imagine there'll be lots of questions, and thank you so much for getting us stared today and for being
Great.
here.
Thanks.
So you can sit back and relax now for a little while, and you can unmic and uncamera yourself there. So we're going to move on now to Breeda Bermingham. So Breeda is a menopause researcher, coach, and social entrepreneur, having worked with women for years as a midwife and public health nurse. And in response to what she sees as a massive injustice to women and society, she set up the MidLife Women Rock Project, fantastic name, which includes MidLife Women Rock Cafes. So that was set up in 2019 with the assistance of Social Entrepreneurs Ireland. These are platforms that have helped hundreds of women to date become informed, educated, and supported through their menopause. Her new book, MidLife Women Rock, a Menopause Story for a New Generation, will be published at the end of October. And just to note as well, one of the reasons we're having this event is due to, we're very keen to respond to members, network members' idea, and Breeda's been advocating for greater attention to this in the network. So we're delighted she's able to join us today. So Breeda, I'll invite you to turn on your mic and your camera.
Great. Lovely. Hi, Louise. Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Thanks so much for being here. Can you tell us a bit about your MidLife Women Rock Project and what led you to starting it?
Okay, I just wanted to say something there in relation to Cueva. What Cueva had mentioned in her presentation, the importance of the individualized approach. I actually attended the British Menopause Society's AGM on Tuesday night, and they were talking about over the last 18 months, the contact that they had with their members. The repeated themes that came up were, number one, the importance of that individualized approach, because no two women are going to have the same menopause symptoms or the same needs. And the other big issue with the British Menopause Society was the access to information. There's a huge problem. Women do not know what is happening to them. I was one of those women. That's why I set up the MidLife Women Rock Project. Was I did not know what perimenopause was pre-2018. I did not know that there were 34 plus different symptoms associated with perimenopause and menopause. So there is a huge injustice to us women as we're moving into our perimenopause and menopause years, with the massive dearth in information out there. So I started off with a Facebook page. I completed a psychology degree in 2018. And as a result of that, I was reviewing the research on midlife women, quite an understudied cohort inside in academia. And my interest in midlife women and mental health was piqued when I attended the Meg Matthews Menopause Conference in 2019. And that was a very interesting conference on menopause. Dr. Louise Newson was the medical lead on the day, but it was the first menopause conference globally to be held, organized by women for other women. Prior to this, it was the medicalization of menopause. That's what the conferences were dealing with, and Louise Newson actually referred to this. But a statistic came up that day in the UK that mental health rates for girls and women are highest between the ages of 45 and 55 in the UK, and suicide rates for women and girls were highest at around 50-51. Over the course of a discussion then at the break, nobody could come up with the answer, or nobody seemed to be able to say why women at 51 were committing suicide. So when I returned to Ireland, I decided to look further into the statistics here. And the CSO figures for 2019 in Ireland show us that between the years 2001 and 2018, the highest rates of mental health issues have been in women between 45 and 60. And the highest rates of suicide for women and girls, again, between 2001 and 2018, are at 51. The only year that was different was 2016, where teenage girls' rates of mental health were recorded as higher. So it's wonderful, Louise, that you and the Women's Mental Health Network are bringing the focus onto midlife women, because I feel we've kind of been overlooked. There's been fantastic funding and support for adolescent mental health, antenatal mental health in recent years, and postnatal mental health. But midlife women and mental health is an area, and it's wonderful that we're starting to open the conversation, because I think silence, I completed a master's last year on menopause in Ireland, and silence is the real enemy. The women are doing each other a massive disservice in not talking about menopause. And this is related to the taboo. Taboos are there to keep us quiet, and certainly menopause has kept women in Ireland. It's actually global though, it's not just Ireland. We have remained quiet, and mute women, shame and menopause have been synonymous for decades. And I believe that we are the generation of women that we're going to break that cycle. Because the truth is that there's nothing to be ashamed about being a menopausal woman in 2021, provided you get the information, the support, and the understanding of both menopause and yourself. And that's where I'm coming from with the MidLife Women Rock Project and the cafes.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that. It's very inspiring to hear such passionate advocacy for an area that's, as you say, has been overlooked and perhaps neglected in terms of mental health awareness. And I know you were mentioning information there, and one of the key messages that's emphasized on the website is knowledge is power in menopause. From your experiences and from the stories of the women you work with, what information would you see as most vital for people to be made aware of? And also, what would you like to see happening to normalize the conversation around menopause?
I mean, essentially, as I said, it's this information deficit. We do not understand. There's been no preparation, no information, and no widely available education around perimenopause and menopause. And this has been handed down to us. This is an intergenerational issue. And fundamentally, we need to change that. And I'm just so delighted that the government are starting to respond. And step one, they announced last week they're opening up a menopause clinic. I really feel the game changer is going to be the education and information campaign, so that everybody in Ireland is going to start to understand, or even start to open the conversation, because the taboo is keeping us silent. If we can remove the taboo, and I mean, social change, it doesn't occur overnight, but I follow what's going on in the UK. I do a lot of work in the UK, and there's been a massive midlife women's movement, and there's a shift in the narrative there over the last 2 years. And it's occurring because more and more women are deciding to speak up about menopause and wanting more information about this time in life. And information is massively powerful. We've had no education. I'm a midwife, I'm a public health nurse. I did not know what menopause really meant to me. And I just think there's a massive disservice to all women out there in not knowing this.
Yeah, thanks, Breeda. And I think from what I'm taking from you is that it sounds like you're seeing a cultural and a generational shift, which is really positive in terms of breaking with any remaining taboo. And I do notice, or I noted that the Women's Health Task Force have menopause as one of their key issues. And in terms of information, they're trying to prepare a trusted information source,
Yes.
that will focus on menopause and help, provide valid and trusted information, which might be a step in the right direction as well from what you're saying.
Yes. I mean, I see menopause as it's a puzzle, and there are lots of different pieces to the puzzle, and it's a story that's still evolving because we still don't know everything about it. And the reason we don't know about it is because it's been taboo, and we've been silent, and it's in shifting that silence that we will be able to help women. And I mean, the women I work with through the cafes or through the 6-week courses that I run, there's a voracious appetite for information. And there's been this huge resistance to the silence and that's shown in how women negotiate the silence by attending talks. Like 2 years ago, women were telling me they were traveling from Kerry to Dublin to listen to a talk on menopause when somebody was speaking about it, or from Galway to Cork, just to hear and get that information, because it's not widely available. So opening up the conversations and providing the support for women. And what I find is that women are amazing. Once they're provided with information, we have this power within us to decide how we're going to navigate this time in our lives. But the problem to date is that the information isn't there. And that's causing the crisis. That's what I see in with the women that I'm working with. But once women women are supported, you can change the whole narrative and you can change the way they're experiencing menopause.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for giving that nuance and context and sharing your own personal experience as well. We really appreciate it. We'll come back to you again as well with a few minutes towards the end in the panel. So thank you so much for being here today, Breeda.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So you can take a back seat now and relax and turn off your mic and camera. Thank you so much. And we're going to move on now to Dr. Cliona Loughnane, who is a postdoctoral researcher on the Care Visions project based in UCC, which and her work is reflecting on care experiences during and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic in order to reimagine future care relations, practices and policies in Ireland and internationally. Previously, Cliona has worked for more than a decade in research and policy positions in the health and social care sector. Most recently, Cliona worked as Women's Health Coordinator with the National Women's Council, working to improve women's health outcomes and experiences of healthcare. And this role included co-founding and coordinating the Women's Mental Health Network. So on a personal note, we're especially delighted to have her back with us for the morning and to learn about her work. Cliona is kindly going to give us a few minutes speaking to her work with the Care Visions project and exploring the impact of competing gender roles on women in midlife, and more specifically then the impact of caring on women's mental health in midlife. So I will pass the mic to Cliona for the next few moments and invite you to turn on your camera and your mic.
Thanks very much, Louise. And it's so lovely to be back with everybody, even if it's virtually. I look forward to being back in that room in St. Pat's sometime in the future. So as Louise was saying, I think I've been invited here today to maybe just expand the conversation a little bit out to think about us as women kind of collectively, and what are the experiences we might be having in midlife that can impact on our mental health. So as Louise said, at the moment, I'm working on this project in UCC. It's called Care Visions, and there's a team of 5 of us working on it. And what we're doing is we're looking at what are people's experiences of giving and receiving care. How has the pandemic impacted on that? And how can we improve it? Because we know that, caregiving and care receiving in Ireland can be difficult. And to try and think about care in a different way, we're using this perspective called the feminist ethics of care. And what that says is that, care is actually at the center of everybody's life. And it really should be much more at the center of how we decide on policies, on how we resource our public services, and on how we plan our work and our lives. And we think this could have a real impact on women, because at the moment, women do take on most of the care work in Ireland. So what I'd like to talk about is drawing on this kind of feminist ideas, is to think about 2 collective experiences that we might have as women and that might be impacting our mental health. And that's, I suppose, and it speaks to what Breeda was talking about, the kind of cultural and social norms that impact us as women living in a gender unequal world. And then to talk just for a few moments, about the growing care responsibilities women often experience in midlife, and again, how that can impact on mental health. So the first thing I'd say is that being a woman in a gender unequal world can impact our mental health. And I think when we think about it from a feminist perspective, feminism is about ending sexism and ending the oppression that people experience because of gender inequality. And part of the reason why women may experience more higher rates of anxiety and of depression and so on may be linked, and I think they are linked to some of those daily oppressions that we can face as women. But also, and particularly in midlife, I think, to the multiple roles that women are playing and required to play in our society. So, as we enter our 40s and our 50s and our 60s, women are often the breadwinner, the carer, the homemaker, and they're doing those things at the same time. But at the same time as taking on all those roles, women are, receiving less pay, and women often have less power, in politics, in employment, and so on. And of course, as Louise pointed to at the beginning, all of these things are much more challenging if you're from a marginalized community of women, if you're a traveller woman or a migrant woman, for example. So, there's this idea I think we have to think about as women in midlife, is the multiple and competing gender roles that we're having to play, and how that might impact on the time we have for our own mental health, the kind of resources that we can put into our mental wellness. As Dr. Hartley mentioned, you just mightn't have time to exercise. You may not be able to sleep because of all the demands that are on you. And Kathleen Moran, if people know Kathleen Moran, she's a journalist and a writer in the UK, and she wrote that book, How to Be a Girl, or how to be a woman in her 30s. And she was really talking about how feminism can really, help us as women to come together and to improve our position. But she's actually come back to the issue in her mid-40s, and she's written a new book, and it's called More Than a Woman. And in that, she's talking about really how her perspective on feminism and being a woman has changed by midlife because of all this competing roles and all the pressures that are on women. She really felt that she would have solved the problems in her 40s, but now she finds there are new issues she contends with. And she talks about this as feeling that women in midlife become the fifth emergency service, and that they're there, that women often are called upon at home, at work, to rush in and provide help to others. But she's trying to think about, well, what does that mean for the woman themselves? And I suppose that really relates then to the second thing I think that we need to think about when we think about women's midlife, and that's the level of care that women provide in the midlife, and it often increases at that time. And when I talk about care responsibilities and women's mental health, I don't want to say, that there aren't very positive things about caring, many of us are providing care. We provide care to children, to our parents, and we do it because we want to and because we find it fulfilling. And that's really important. But what can be difficult, I suppose, is when that caring is just expected of us as women, or when we're having to take up care responsibilities because there isn't proper childcare available, or there isn't proper services for people with disabilities. And again, this goes back to, I think, what Breeda was talking about how we've been shaped by culture as women, that there's a pressure on women, a care pressure on women, and some of this is cultural because we've been thought about as kind of the caring gender. And that has meant, I suppose, that women have often taken up this emotional work and they provide emotional support to others. But in the process, as women, maybe we aren't providing, or we can't pay attention to our own emotional needs. And I think, sometimes we can feel like we're the only one, or it's just the people we know that women are providing a lot of care. But, the statistics tell us that. The CSO will tell us, that 3/4 of those receiving carers allowance are women. And also the stats will show that the numbers receiving those caring related allowances are really women in their midlife, around in the mid-30s up to the mid-50s. There's research as well. We often hear from the Economic and Social Research Institute about economic issues, but they did a big study around caring and housework. And they found that women on average spend double the amount of time that men do caring, and also tend to do on average twice as much housework. And I think as well, and this is something that we're thinking about in Care Visions, is it's not just that women are giving care, women are also receivers of care, and we need to think about our multiple roles. So if I'm a woman, for example, a woman with a disability, maybe caring for her own children, but may need support herself, or a woman in midlife may be caring for a partner, but may also have their own health needs, for example. So these issues are complicated, and we play many different, we sit in many different positions. So this is all to say as well, this is all before the pandemic hit, these statistics and these facts. And we know that during the pandemic, the shutting of care services, the ending of childcare, that all had a real impact on women. And those issues are only starting to be thought about now. And I suppose the main point I think that we need to think about in relation to caring is it's not caring that's the problem, it's caring when that caring is unsupported that can feel very difficult. So when you're providing care, but the support services aren't there around you, that can be a very difficult place to be. And this month, the Department of Health and that Women's Health Task Force that has been mentioned brought out a report of a consultation with women. And I found it, particularly distressing to read what women who were carers were saying. Because women who were carers were saying they were hurt. They were hurt by the treatment that they felt they received when they were trying to get care for those they were caring for. A woman referred to living in a life sentence, and that she felt the families were treated with contempt when they looked for, care services. And it really shows, I think, that level of hurt and anger and upset. Some of it is for the carer themselves, but really it's for the person that they're caring for, and feeling that the state really isn't supporting the care work that needs to be done. And I would relate that, I guess, back to the pandemic. I think the pandemic has really shown us that, our society and all our lives are very reliant on people providing care. It's often women providing that care. But we also know that women's ability to provide care, it isn't elastic. It can't go on forever. You know, at a certain stage, we will all reach a point where we're at breaking point or where we need to stop. And that's why I think we really need to think about what are the care services, what are the childcare services, the elder care services that we need to be able to support us all to live good lives. So I guess in conclusion, what I'm saying is, you know, I think as Breeda said, we need to think about us individually as women and have individual supports, but we also need to think of us collectively as women. And I think that, you know, if mental health services would think more and respond more to the lives that women are living in midlife, and particularly to the caring responsibilities that women take on, that would really support women's mental health in midlife much better.
Thank you so much, Cliona. It's really enlightening to hear you bring all that information together and to kind of zoom out and see the kind of broader realities and trends that we know to be true for women in midlife. And that idea of women in midlife being a fifth emergency service is a really interesting one. And as you pointed out, during the pandemic, we've seen multiple, not just in Ireland, but internationally, studies showing the increased demand on caring work on women in particular, and how that has had impacts on well-being and mental health. So absolutely, hopefully, I know we're tight for time, so we'll come back to you, but I'd love to know your thoughts later on the Q&A about potential for shifts, I guess, in the value of care, the value that society places in care. Thank you so much for that. So we'll move on now to our final speaker, Catherine O'Keefe. Catherine is Ireland's first menopause coach and speaker and founder of the Menopause Success Summit, Ireland's first virtual menopause summit, which is being held tomorrow. And I think there are still some spaces available. So we'll come back to that in a little bit. A former financial services director, Catherine regularly works with corporate clients on menopause support in the workplace. Catherine also has a private practice where she works one-to-one with women through menopause. Catherine is regularly featured in the media and on radio. And in fact, I know she's been on the radio already this morning, and is also currently writing her second book. Catherine is an affiliated member of the British Menopause Society and a member of the Professional Speakers Association. We're especially grateful for Catherine being here when I imagine it's possibly the busiest time of her year so far with the summit tomorrow. So I'll invite you to turn on your camera and turn on your mic. I know Catherine has very kindly shared a code if people want to register for the Menopause Success Summit to get a 20% reduction. It is success in all small letters. We can share that in the chat box as well on the link.
Thanks, Louise. Can you see me okay?
Yes, and I can hear you as well. You're very welcome.
Morning, everyone, and thanks so much for inviting me along today, Louise.
Thanks for making time in an extremely busy period for you. Can you tell us a bit about to get us started, about the work you do through the Wellness Warrior Service and the Menopause Success Summit as well?
I guess a lot of what I do is working in workplaces, and you know, that's from retail all the way through to corporates in terms of education. And as we've heard from, you know, all of the panelists today, education is the bedrock of menopause. You know, knowledge is power, and it's a big area that we're lacking in. And it's not just Ireland, it's the world over. And actually, if you look at our colleagues in the US, they're actually further behind the curve than we actually are. And certainly, you know, the UK are probably that bit ahead of us. But, you know, education is so important. So a lot of what I do is educating in groups, educating, you know, working with women on a one-to-one basis. And it's really just providing the essential knowledge that unfortunately is difficult to come by. And, you know, it's great to hear that NWCI is going to put a resource together. And I know the government are working on that as well, which is essential, because two key things we need in menopause for all women is education and support. And that's one of the things, like, you know, with St. Patrick's, the support you do in relation to mental health is so important. The mental health aspects of menopause are, I feel they're very understated. They don't get the acknowledgement that they should get. For the thousands of women I've spoken to over several years, I would say 95% of them have experienced mental health issues at some stage in the journey. So a lot of what I'm doing is really just educating and supporting. And it's educating about the symptoms that maybe we're not getting enough information about, which is the vast majority of them. But it's also about the symptoms that we're just not talking enough about, like the vaginal atrophy and all of the psychological, the emotional aspects of menopause. Because as we know, and I think Cueva mentioned earlier, you know, how the increase of depression increases threefold for women in these years. I see it firsthand. You know, suicide rates, if, you know, we look at the UK statistics, we know they're higher for women that are going through perimenopause and menopause, and we don't have the supports that we need. But, you know, hopefully education and trying to support women, you know, I always say every conversation is a stepping stone to change. So I think every bit of support we can offer, even in a small way, if it's in the workplace, if it's through the family, through the community, is really, really key. Because that's the only way. We know it's still a taboo. We know it is. That's a, you know, there's no way getting around that. I have been doing a survey over the last couple of months in workplaces, and one of the overriding feedback that I am getting is like 80 to 81% of people still feel that menopause is a taboo. So we're making headway. We are breaking ground, but we have a long way to go. And to get to where we need to get to, you know, it needs to be across all society. We need the government to help. We need every part of society to come in to really break this and get the education out there.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that. And again, it's a real recurrent theme, is that information, education, removing any remaining taboo. And I know you mentioned work at the outset there, and I know that's an area you're really keen to focus on. And another area that's got increased media attention, especially in the UK, I know there's been a lot of attention as regards discrimination and discriminatory practices against women in the workplace during midlife. What kinds of issues do you think there needs to be more awareness and attention of when it comes to the workplace?
I think, Louise, why we've seen a little bit more about it from the UK perspective is because they've had the tribunals, they've had women bring it to the press, to bring it to court, which is actually brilliant. Have we had it here? Definitely, we definitely have. It's just all been sorted, you know, outside, hasn't gone to court, etc. You know, it has to be addressed. We have to have the education, and that is educating people in work. And it's not just the women, it's also your work colleagues, so that they can understand what menopause is about. And also the managers, HR, senior management, it has to come all the way down if you want it to be a long-term, consistent approach. I always say, you know, education in relation to menopause, it cannot be a flash in the pan. It has to be that you introduce, maybe it's ongoing sessions, maybe it's guidances, practical supports in work, but you have to look at it from a long-term perspective in terms of how you support your employees. Because look, women are amazing. We are absolutely amazing. And by the time we hit, if we just talk about natural menopause, generally you can be at the peak of your career. You know, the amount of wisdom and knowledge you will have gained over those years that you can support so many other work colleagues. Like, this is when you really want to support women through these years. And we know when it comes to the symptoms in the workplace, the survey that I did, I knew what the top 5 were, and I expected them to all kind of come back in around the same kind of rates, but I was not ready for the disparity between brain fog, cognitive function, which came in at 80% of participants felt that was by far the most challenging symptom. 65% felt it was anxiety. All of the symptoms were brain-related, psychological, emotional related. Hot flushes were 39%. The more physical things just weren't as crucial or weren't causing as many challenges. So it's being aware of particularly the psychological aspects, because that is what creates the issues in work. The loss of confidence, the loss of self-esteem, it becomes a vicious circle. And when you look at women in work, and I'm not just talking about the actual physical workplace, in my book, every woman works. We are what we call an encumbered labour force, because yes, you might work 9 to 5, but chances are when you go home, you're on your second job. That could be minding, as Clina said, you know, the sandwich years, minding aging parents. It could be children. It can be, you know, any aspect of life. And I completely concur with everything Clina said, because the gap in care for carers it's shocking. It really is shocking. And I see that on a regular basis.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of competing issues and demands, and it's really interesting how prominent the psychological impacts are. I saw a quote from Susie Orbach yesterday when I was just preparing for this, saying the menopause arrives, seeking out our vulnerabilities like a guided missile, just as we need all our strength to cope with daily life. So that sense of potentially being the busiest time of a woman's life. I'm conscious of time, so we're going to move on to the panel, but just very briefly, I know we mentioned at the outset the diversity of experiences in relation to menopause and access to supports, for example, may vary for people. And this is an area you have a particular interest in terms of ensuring support for different groups, and especially minority groups. I don't know if you have a final thought just to wrap up your part on that.
Menopause affects all ages and all genders. And I always say it has no boundaries. So we know for a fact women with intellectual disability, Down syndrome, you know, the traveling community, Black women, all smaller minority groups, they have far more challenges in a variety of areas than we may have going through natural menopause, where there's no other underlying health conditions. And it's an area that needs massive support. And that's one thing that I am really hoping the government will carve out some independent work, budget, whatever is needed to make sure that we start to cater for all of society. And that's I've been talking about that for years. Menopause can be challenging for the settled community, but it is so much more challenging for the unsettled community, and particularly when you come to depression and anxiety. So support across all of society is essential.
Absolutely, thanks for that. And hopefully, you know, there are signs of, you know, improvement and increased attention with Women's Health Task Force and opening of clinics, etc. So hopefully we'll begin to see a more responsive. Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for your time. We've lots of questions and comments coming in. So I'm going to invite all the panel to turn on their cameras. We will hopefully get to a few questions. I know we're short on time and everybody's very busy. So I'll try and get through a few, and apologies in advance if we don't get to everybody. And just to know, we have shared links to everybody's different area of work and different projects that have been mentioned today, and you can find them in the chat box, and also links to different mental health information sources. So we've had different comments, people sort of flagging the time demands on GPs and how to kind of how people kind of address things within a short time frame. The importance of considering the needs of women with existing mental health difficulties who are experiencing or negotiating additional complications with menopause. I might come to Cueva if that's okay. We have a couple of more medically oriented questions I hope you might be able to help with. One is, someone is wondering if there's a connection between a person having severe PMS, Pmdd, postnatal depression, and an increased effect of perimenopause on mental health.
Yes, there absolutely is. And we know that women who have had a history of being very symptomatic with their PMS, or women who have had postnatal depression or postnatal anxiety are definitely at increased risk of having issues with symptoms in a similar vein, so depression and anxiety, as they go through perimenopause and menopause. There are women that are presumably genetically susceptible to fluctuations in estrogen levels and fluctuations in their hormones. And that it's interesting because they've studied this and they've shown it isn't actually, they're not experiencing the hormones differently. It's not that they have more of them or less of them or a bigger change in their hormones. If you were to measure their estradiol levels, they'd actually be similar to someone who's not having those same symptoms. So the thinking is that underlying it is a genetic susceptibility, that for some women, your brain is, vulnerable to changes in these hormones, and that can make our brains make us feel depressed or have anxiety. And that can happen throughout our life. So you get small little fluctuations of estrogen and progesterone towards the end of a normal menstrual cycle. And for some women, that can produce PMS type symptoms. And then something like PMDD or premenstrual disorder, which is a bit more, I suppose, a bit further down that spectrum, that's a kind of more, a more kind of dramatic effect of those fluctuations of hormones. And then women who have postnatal depression and anxiety, it's a similar underlying physiology. It's a susceptibility or vulnerability in terms of your mood to large fluctuations in those hormones. And that's essentially what's happening with perimenopause. So yes is the short answer to that question.
Great, thank you so much for that. We've also had a couple of questions regarding a hysterectomy and impacts on, at different ages, and impacts on menopause and mental health. Would that be a similar kind of associations there? Or?
So there's different types of hysterectomy. Some women have their ovaries spared and the ovaries remain behind in situ. And for other women, they have their ovaries removed. And it comes down to why you are having your hysterectomy to begin with. So not all hysterectomized women are the same. It depends on what path has led them to that surgery. And also, I suppose, it has a different impact on different women at different points in their life. There's a big difference between someone who has a hysterectomy in their 20s versus someone who has a hysterectomy in their late 40s or early 50s. And I think you have to take on board the psychological impact of having a hysterectomy, which gets overlooked a huge amount as well. So it's surgery, and fairly major surgery at that. There's a recovery period associated with it. That's difficult. But, in addition to that, there's the loss of something. Now, not everybody feels that. I think there's lots of women who have a hysterectomy and they skip out of the hospital delighted to be free of, depending, I suppose, on what brought them to having a hysterectomy to begin with. But for some women, there is a feeling of loss. There may be the loss of reproduction, which is a huge deal as well. There's a huge psychological impact of hysterectomy. And women who have their ovaries spared, they're often told, we've taken your womb, but you can't be menopausal because you still have your ovaries. So that's not true. So there's definitely scientific evidence and research that would support an increased risk of having earlier menopause, bringing that menopause forward, failure of those ovaries kind of earlier in women who've had any sort of pelvic surgery, including hysterectomy. So something definitely to take note of.
Okay, thank you very much for that. And I think your answer kind of speaks back to that, the importance of individualized care and figuring out the right referral pathways too, which I know a couple of people have commented on. Thanks so much for that. A question for anybody, actually, any of the panel who might be aware, people are interested on accessing CPD or trainings who maybe work in the field of mental health care or psychotherapy. And are there any CPD courses or trainings that people would recommend around mental health and midlife, or mental health and menopause, that any of the panel might be aware of? No. Okay, I mean, that's quite telling. That's an area we might need to look at then. I guess it probably depends on the sphere you're in, and maybe looking at your professional organization. It's certainly something we'll bring back within St. Patrick's in terms of potentially training offerings we have, but that's interesting, isn't it? And then in terms of the need for targeted information and support for women with existing mental health issues, I don't know if Catherine or Breeda might have awareness of resources, support groups or information that we could direct people to.
I would say, a great resource is particularly for the mental health aspects, I'm a huge believer of cognitive behavioural therapy. And if you go on to, I'll try and get a link, the Women's Health Initiative, they have fantastic resources put together by Professor Myra Hunter on very practical approaches for anxiety, insomnia, hot flushes, many of the very typical menopause symptoms. But we know cognitive behavioural therapy is one of the most effective forms of therapy in menopause and a great support. So I'll see if I can just find that link and I'll share it to you.
Great, thank you. I think I found it there. And
brilliant.
I know it's something Dr. Hartley has mentioned as well.
And Louise, actually, sorry, Louise, actually there is training in CBT, the British Menopause Society. They actually do trainings for professionals.
Yeah, you have to be a nurse or a GP.
Yes. So if you're working in the area, you can actually train as a CBT practitioner. Sea Change Ireland, Louise, have you heard of SEE? Sea Change Ireland are an organisation that are tackling the stigma around mental health. So they may be something that women might be interested in joining.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have an ambassadors program, and so to kind of as a way to focus in on this area as well. And if we aren't, just to note as well, if we don't share all the information today or get to all your questions, we are going to do a follow-up newsletter for members on this topic. So we will gather together information and information sources that are valid. I'm conscious.
Louise, could I just say something too? It was something Cliona mentioned, and I think it's so important when we're talking about menopause and midlife women, and it's all feeds into mental health. What's actually happening, at the moment, let's say globally, when it comes to menopause, is we're uncovering decades and decades of shame and silence. And it's that collective derogatory framing of women when they reach the end of their reproductive stage of life. That has to be challenged and that has to be tackled. And today, let's say we're just it's the tip of the iceberg, but it's wonderful that we're actually here talking about it, because that's how change and social change is going to happen, and cultural change. And that's where we need to move, because menopause is even bigger than the symptoms we experience as women. There's a bigger story here that needs to be told. And over the last 3 years of researching, along with working with women on a one-to-one basis and in groups in the last 2 years, I've put everything that I have learned into a book, and that's the book I'm going to publish next month. That's out there. So we need to keep talking. We're doing each other a massive disservice in not talking about it.
Absolutely. So keep the conversation going. And
yes,
there's a lot of talk about potential major generational shifts as a result of the pandemic, and we would hope that things like discussions and value placed on care and recognizing, I guess, as well, these issues will get more attention. I am very apologetic that we haven't got to everybody's questions, and I didn't get to come back to Cliona either there. I'm so sorry. I'm very conscious of the time as well, and that everybody, including attendees, has likely got a very busy morning. So I'm going to hand over to Alana now. And personally, I'd just like to thank you all for taking part and tuning in. And I'm very hopeful about shifts in attitudes and conversation and openness around menopause and midlife, having had the opportunity to listen to such a great panel of women working to affect change in this area. So thank you so much, and I'll hand over to Alana.
Thank you so much, Louise, and to all the panel, Cliona, Catherine, Breeda and Cueva. It's really been a very enlightening discussion, and particularly for those of us on the call who may not have had as much knowledge prior. And I think the points raised really emphasize that this is an area of life that hasn't had that consideration. And particularly when we think about the individualized needs that Breeda mentioned, and how different women will present with different, dimensions to their experience, and how as a broader society, we need to be alert to that, not only just when, seeing a medical professional or speaking with friends, but also thinking about the workplace and the community as a whole, and how we can, I suppose, acknowledge the diversity of those experiences and be on hand to provide support when anyone comes to us, and create the enabling conditions where women feel able to speak about those challenges, and particularly the care burden that Clean articulated so well. And I think that line that Catherine says around, every woman works, and ultimately whether you're working in a 9-to-5 workplace context or whether you're working in the home and contributing in that way, these are full-time jobs that we take on, and of course it's going to have a huge impact on our mental health. And I think the statistics that Breeda highlighted and Cueva as well around the 3 times more likely to experience depression or anxiety, the increased needs that present in this perimenopausal stage, these are really things we must be cognizant about, and which we are, I suppose, beginning hopefully with today and through other initiatives to have a greater societal awareness of. So a really, really helpful webinar, and we will be following up with our network newsletter, which will have all those kind of resources which were alluded to throughout the session. And we're conscious that because of this online format, it's really made it more difficult to have those informal conversations and to be able to unpick some of the issues further. And so we will kind of put a suggestion in the newsletter around how we might take forward the conversation, in a future meeting, maybe a more discursive platform where people could come to reflect on what's been heard in this information sharing event, and maybe think about how it applies to their own work practice, or maybe personal experience if they felt comfortable sharing that. So I think, because this is only the beginning of this conversation, and we will have more info on that in the newsletter, which is forthcoming. But just to reiterate about Breeda's book, which is coming out next month, MidLife Women Rock. So keep your eye out for that. It should be a really good read. And then similarly, Catherine's event tomorrow, and the very generous discount code of success. So if you go on to the Menopause Success Summit, then you'll be able to access tickets on that. But just a really big thank you again to Catherine, Breeda, Cueva and Cleana for a really interesting and thought-provoking session this morning. Thank you very much.